overgangsklachten worden vaak niet als zodanig herkend.
Ik was altijd energiek en sociaal en attent en echt op tafel dansen en helemaal leuk. En nu ben ik gewoon moe en ik heb gewoon geen zin in een sociaal gedoe.
Ik had ook enorme last van zenuwen. Dus zeg maar het gevoel dat je een podium op moet en een speech moet gaan geven voor 1000 man. En dat dan de hele dag door.
Ik kreeg echt zo'n foggy brain dat ik van de ene op de andere dag niet meer kon lezen. Dat wil zeggen, ik kon wel lezen. Ik kon wel gewoon zien wat er stond of zo. Maar ik kon niet focussen.
Een kramp op mijn borst, het doet ineens echt zeer. En dan ineens moet ik naar adem snakken.
Ik ben Suzanne Rettans en ik wil het hebben over die zoektocht. Over de implicaties voor werk en gezin. En ik wil het hebben over oplossingen, want die zijn er. Welkom bij de podcast We zijn toen niet gek. En welkom bij aflevering 41 van We zijn toch niet gek. Vandaag heb ik een bijzondere aflevering, één in het Engels, die via Zoom is opgenomen. Dus heb je moeite met de taal, dan kun je op mijn Substack meekijken, want daar is die ondertiteld in het Nederlands. Vandaag gaan we het hebben over de rol van progesteron bij ADHD-klachten, maar ook bij het verzachten van anxiety-klachten, waar een deel van de vrouwen steeds meer last van krijgt na hun 35ste, omdat progesteron sneller afneemt dan oestrogeen, dat nu net gaat pieken en dalen en ze dus eigenlijk in een staat van oestrogeendominantie terechtkomen. Pas geleden nam ik al een video op waarin ik afstand neem van een paar dingen die gezegd worden in de eerste afleveringen van het H3-netwerk. Ik sta niet meer achter het platgooien van een cyclus van jonge meisjes met ADHD of autisme door de anticonceptiepil door te slikken, om te voorkomen dat ze last krijgen van hormoonschommelingen. En sowieso vind ik de anticonceptiepil geen middel om hormonale stemmingsklachten op te lossen in de perimenopauze, omdat ik denk dat wij het echte progesteron, dat je door de pil nauwelijks meer hebt, heel erg hard nodig hebben. En ondertussen worden we wel volgepropt met synthetische orale shit en antidepressiva en ADHD-medicatie. Ik zeg niet dat het niet helpt, maar ik denk wel dat het anders kan. Beter. In mijn zoektocht naar antwoorden luisterde ik naar de ADHD Women's Wellbeing podcast van Kate Morisseff. En daar was Adèle Wimsett te gast, een Engelse hormoonspecialist die gespecialiseerd is in de perimenopauze en de behandeling van ADHD-klachten. En zij doet dat met progesteron. Ik heb contact met haar opgenomen en vertelde haar aan het begin van ons Zoom-gesprek dat het beleid in Nederland nu is om meisjes met deze diagnose zo snel mogelijk te laten beginnen met de pil, zonder stopweek, om te voorkomen dat ze last krijgen van die hormoonschommelingen. Dat beleid ook is uitgesproken in mijn eerste podcast. Ik heb mijn eigen dochter destijds ook aan de zoelie gezet, omdat ik dacht dat ik haar daarmee hielp. Maar hoe verder ik kom in mijn gesprekken met andere specialisten, hoe meer ik het gevoel heb dat dit niet de oplossing is. Dus ik heb het gevoel dat ik dit moet rechtzetten.
Do you know what? Isn't that interesting that through that whole journey, that for you there's that sense of responsibility?
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, and not actually on these people that we give so much power because they are doctors, you know, in these specialist fields that actually are
actually,
trained.
it is of the Menopause Society. And also our very, Sandra Coy is a really known psychiatrist. She also did a lot of research for ADHD. But I think she's wrong. Yeah, and now I have a lot of women who also see the light, and they are worried for themselves, but especially for their daughters, how to treat them. Yeah,
I love that, and you know, I think I get very cross about this, as you can hear. Like, you know, when you hear me speak, I get very passionate about it, and actually, a lot of all those doctors are going to be coming from a place where they think they're offering a genuine solution.
Yeah.
They have been trained like this, okay? And pharmaceutical companies have done an incredible job of ensuring that these prescribers use the same term progesterone for synthetic progestin. So whilst I get hugely frustrated at prescribers who continue this message, they don't actually realize they're doing anything wrong.
No.
And that's what I have to remind myself, is they think they're offering a solution and they're not, because they don't share the harmful side effects of synthetic progestins.
Yeah.
you know, and then there is this pattern that I see every day in my clinic where women are gaslit when they have side effects and told, no, it's not that. I mean, I've had women on their knees sobbing with me with suicidal ideation a few days after having the Mirena coil put in, and they've gone back to the doctor and they've said it's nothing to do with that. And this is where my frustration builds with the medical world. It's one thing saying, okay, this is how I'm trained, but it's another when a woman is being gaslit in her experience and told, no, that's not happening, and then refusing to broaden their knowledge of understanding. And I think if you can get a prescriber to become curious with you and say, okay, let me see more about this, that's incredible. But that's not what happens. We get told, no, go away, you know, and then this woman is left thinking, what's wrong with me? What's going on? And I think in the neurodivergent community, we have much more of a sensitivity generally to these hormones.
Yeah. Because I was, well, the more I learned about progesterone, the real progesterone, and all of its effects throughout the body and functions, I also thought it is not good, especially with younger girls, to get rid of their cycle, because
the cycle doesn't establish itself properly into regular ovulation until your early 20s, right? It's taking this time. And I'm getting girls come through their mums to me who at 13, 14, 15 are being put on their pill because their cycle isn't regular. Well, it's not meant to be regular. So why are we doing this? You know, we don't do this to boys. You know, they get acne, or let's shut down their reproductive system. It's become this answer for everything because it's a system that doesn't know how to help treat the root causes of what's going on in a female physiology. And even medication tends to be tested on male lab rats. So women we know have more side effects generally to things. And so we get treated as small men, and we're not. And yet we're not having this conversation. And once I think the changes are coming from women at our level, Suzanne, they're not coming from the top and where the change makers need to be, because a small amount of people are making a lot of money from women being on this. But the change is coming through forums like yours, where we're being able to get this message out to women. You know, I mean, what I would say is the response when I share this stuff is 95% incredible. I get so many messages and things from going, oh my gosh, this has changed my life. Thank you so much. But there is a small percentage of people, either prescribers who get really triggered by it because it's challenging what they're doing. But I always invite a conversation about that. I'm like, show me the research. Tell me more about what you know. And they just can't. And also women who have had a very difficult experience with progesterone, that they either or with progestin, which they think is progesterone, or they've been put on a low dose of progesterone and felt awful. And what they don't realize is the answer is more progesterone very quickly, but we don't work in a system where the majority of prescribers understand that. So they sort of see someone talking about progesterone and it's really triggering for them because it's like, no, I'm sensitive to it, I can't have it. And that's not the case.
But so you think that the problem is the progesterone because they say that it's the dip in estrogen, you know, before the menstrual period that causes the mood changes and
estrogen declining will affect mood, right? Because estrogen sensitizes serotonin and dopamine. That so there's going to be a hypothesis that is what is happening. What I see in clinic and what I saw through my study was actually two different things. That the more estrogen was dominating due to a lack of progesterone, the worse the experiences of ADHD and perimenopause, but also histamine. Now, we are more predisposed to have histamine issues. So when estrogen rises at ovulation, let me get this up. It might be easier. Can you let me share my screen? There we go. Done. So what we've always thought was, where's an image? So this is where the study in 2024, which is the most up-to-date and really the best study that we have on ADHD women throughout the cycle, they identified that where there was this estrogen withdrawal at this phase of the cycle was a really vulnerable time for neurodivergent women, okay, which I fully accept. I've spoken to the lead researcher on this and we've had a really interesting conversation together. But they acknowledge that the research, the cohort, they didn't even look at progesterone.
No.
Progesterone wasn't even brought in, right? Because everyone's obsessed with estrogen, right?
Yeah.
Now, actually, what I think goes on here, which I'm not saying this isn't an issue, I think it is, but I think the bigger issue is that as this estrogen has risen here at ovulation, it flares up histamine. Now, this is what you're left with at this. So quite often ADHD women will describe like a PMT type experience around ovulation. That's histamine, right?
Yeah.
So we've had this flare up of histamine, so you feel horrible here.
Yeah.
And then you can get this second rise here, which can feel horrible. But what I saw was that and it was perimenopause. So this is not a surprise, but progesterone to estrogen ratio was not sufficient. So I describe estrogen like the party girl and progesterone who comes home and says, party's over, time to calm down and go to sleep. Right. So if we haven't got enough of that mama saying to the party girl, calm down, the party girl is going to take over. So we're going to see a rise in histamine issues. So that was my hypothesis. Obviously, mine was a very small study because it's just me and it's not funded or anything. It was just my curiosity. But that's what I believe is playing a role. We don't have enough progesterone to stabilize our mood, manage our nervous system, and keep estrogen in check.
Yeah, because obviously that is what's going on in perimenopause. I think when women who are how do you say that, sensitive to these changes are experiencing more and more problems. And I'm doing some research myself, like you just out of pure curiosity. Well, it was because in that first episode, the chairman of our Menopause Society said, "I'm doing this work for 30 years now, and it's really we don't know why some women suffer and others don't, because it isn't their hormone balances. We don't know." And then another gynecologist said, yes, he has a specialist clinic, and then he said, well, something goes wrong with the neurotransmitters in the brain when estrogen is dropping, but we don't know what. But then I had done this DNA test, and I talked about it in the podcast. Yeah, and a lot of women had done that same test, and it goes really into estrogen and methylation, the neurotransmitters, inflammation, detoxification, everything. And I thought, well, I know why I suffered when I was from the age of 38, and I thought, how interesting would it be if we compare all those results?
Wow! Oh my gosh, you have to tell me what you find, because that's the next layer to this, right? We have the estrogen, we have the histamine, and I have a suspicion, and this is great you're doing this study, because I will be so fascinated if you don't mind. Just let me be part of finding out. These methylation pathways, what's happening to the MTHFR gene, what's happening to the COMT gene, how are we moving these estrogens and histamines through, and also alongside that, the neurotransmitters. To me, it's like this perfect, all the pieces of the puzzle would make so much sense, and no one's looked at it.
No, I was surprised as well. And it was, just because I thought, I just learned what happened, and I knew that all these women... But yes, the COMT enzyme is on red or orange, almost every woman. Also the MAO-A, which is for the adrenaline.
Wow.
Also slow.
I'm excited to see your findings, Suzanne. I'm going to stalk you to get them. That would be amazing.
Yeah, because all the results are now in. I did a crowdfunding because well, it costs money to have the biochemical processes behind it. So with the crowdfunding, I paid for that, and and now we're just yeah. It is really really fascinating. Yeah. And the woman I'm working with, she said she can also see you have the different types of PMDD and the allopregnanolone and the reaction on that. And she can see that as well in the results.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing a webinar actually next week on PMDD with a psychologist who specializes in ADHD.
Yeah.
And even just talking to women, about getting them to understand all these different causes of PMDD. I went and trained. There's a private practice near where I live, and they charge ridiculous money to be women's health specialists. And I went in to deliver some training about a year ago. They didn't even know what I was talking about when I spoke about PMDD. I'm like, how are we having this conversation? And the answer is either, oh no, all women get PMT and completely dismiss the severity of it. Or again, oh, we'll just go on the pill or have the coil. And I'm like, that's not sorting it. When you look at the work of Dr. Katarina Dalton, who introduced PMDD and these huge doses of body identical progesterone she'd put in women, and it would treat their PMDD. Well, that was 65 years ago. Why is that not being translated into frontline practice now? And I have to come back to the fact that they would lose a lot of money if women knew that body identical progesterone treated anxiety, mood stabilization, insomnia, regulated the cycle, stopped heavy bleeds. It would negate the need for hysterectomies. Money for pharmaceutical industry to lose. And yet there's no risk and no side effect. I mean, we live in a world that doesn't want women to be well. Because there's too much money to be made.
And I think it is the estrogen dominance, because from those genes, the COM gene is breaking off the neurotransmitters dopamine and noradrenaline and adrenaline, but also estrogen. And then you have the MAO-A, and that depends on estrogen. Because I'm trying to figure out how I can see the role of progesterone in this.
Oh my God, let me get involved.
Huh?
Let me get involved. I want to see it.
It is really interesting. Yeah.
I can show you if it's interesting to you. So when we were testing the hormones, we used mirror. I'm just trying to find it for you. We used the mirror so we could really see what was going on, right? I'll show you. And so it was just fascinating to see some of the patterns that were happening, So here we're getting these massive surges of progesterone in the and I've got consent to share all of this, by the way. In these massive surges of progesterone in the follicular phase, which is really, we wouldn't expect to see, but we think this is adrenal function, right? So we were starting to see these patterns emerging in the women that we tested, and it was just fascinating to see in real time. So if we have a look at this one, this is a real pattern of estrogen dominance, because even though she's ovulated quite early in her cycle, but that's not massively unusual in perimenopause, what we've got here is there's not sufficient progesterone over this estrogen. I want this to be a nice big high for at least 12 days where there's a gap like this in between the progesterone, but you can see there's just not, look how close we are here. There's not enough to oppose it. And then, so, looking at those levels, and then when we bring in those methylation pathways and how it's killing it, that estrogen is then hanging around, or it's being turned into estrogen gremlins, I call them, because they're going around causing, they're like estrogens on steroids. So if we've got this pattern, no wonder that perimenopausal ADHD women have a tougher time, because none of it's being acknowledged. And what's the medical response? Give her more drugs.
And just flatten out that cycle
to a man.
But it's interesting because then you only have to add progesterone. Because when we talked through mail, I said, would it be a solution to to have a little bit of extra estrogen in the week before the menstrual cycle, because then the drop is. But you said no, it will add to the.
Yeah. So estrogen to me is like fire. And progesterone is like the water. Okay. So this has been an approach that, because they're just experimenting on us at the moment, because no one knows what to do with us. So I'm seeing this in Australia, and they haven't got, I mean, it's bad in the UK around progesterone. They haven't got a clue in Australia around it. And so they're doing this. They're going to HRT prescribers and they're saying, well, look, I'm going to give you some cream for estrogen to add into your cycle. And I'm like, no. Please don't, because the basic view is, well, that will make you feel better. But there's so much risk with estrogen. She's the party girl. She's naughty when she gets out of hand. And so if we can push this understanding and awareness around progesterone, how, and even if 1 or 2 doctors hear it, or prescribers or women hear it and go, wait a minute. This is me. This is what I get. I get hundreds of messages of women just saying, this is me. You're talking about me. What do I do?
Because there are some, not a lot, but some practitioners who do add estrogen, the Lenzetto, or for women that have PMS, younger women with PMS, and then in the week before their menstrual cycle. And I think it's based upon the idea it's estrogen. So when we have those girls with ADHD, you think, well, just adding progesterone will help them too with their symptoms.
Progesterone only. I mean, we're naturally, the 99.9% of women are naturally higher in estrogen in their younger years, right? It's very rare I would find a young woman who has an estrogen problem. Very common a progesterone one, particularly for today's generation, because our adrenals are depleting our progesterone. It's much more complex than that, but for basic, that that's what's happening. So we have got this generation of women who are progesterone deficient, when actually they should be at their highest level, because of the nervous system stimulation, because of the craziness of a world they've been growing up in. So, but their estrogen is usually okay. So if they're then adding estrogen onto that, it's just feeding this estrogen dominance picture.
Well, then, but you're only editing it in the week that it drops.
In the luteal phase. But actually that's the phase you want more progesterone in. So
I've learned so, but well, it was said like this in the beginning, but then I also wondered and asked, but isn't it the progesterone?
Okay. Women think they are sensitive to progesterone because they struggle in the luteal phase. Actually, it's not. What I based on just on my experience, it's that difference between the estrogen and progesterone. It's just not enough. It's not enough. And that, but it feels like it's the progesterone that's causing the problem.
Because Sandra Coy, the psychiatrist, said, well, it is a problem because those women with ADHD, they are low in dopamine. That's the problem. But what I'm finding here with these, because a lot of women have ADHD, and they all have a red count, so they actually are very high in dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline.
Do you know
and
what?
estrogen. They are estrogen dominant.
I believe, and I'm not a specialist in ADHD and the dopamine. My thing is like the hormone impact. But I just feel like this theory around we have low dopamine isn't true. I believe it's to do with the detoxification pathways. I feel like we get it, and it's like, you know, so then my brains are always searching for more of it because of how we methylate it. That's what I believe.
Because then you get really high amounts, and you can also have it oxidated, you know, adrenaline.
Absolutely. Okay. So what are we going to do?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it would be really interesting to have those two research put together, because we are now going. We collected everything, and we're now making an analysis.
Amazing.
But I also have to send all the participants the questionnaires. I think, because sometimes you don't see it in the neurotransmitters, or everything goes right. So then there must be, I think, some kind of, well, maybe early child trauma or something that has dysregulated the nervous system. But most of the time you can see it, and then we are going to ask them, well, all kinds of questions. To ask that out, and maybe then it would be interesting to see, what you found with all the, with all the hormone figures.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. And then one more question, because, well, I also, my own daughter has ADHD and autism, a double diagnosis, and I put her on the Zuli because of those first episodes, and they said, well, you have to do that because it will stabilize her. And it did, unfortunately, because now I want her to get off, and she just don't want to. She says, no, I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you then add transdermal progesterone?
No. So this is the thing. It will stabilize you. It will flatline you, right?
Yeah.
So instead of the hormones doing this dance, they're just flatlined, and that feels really good if you're getting highs and lows. So women do respond to kind of go, oh my God, that's such a relief. Whereas obviously my approach is like, well, why is that happening? What's happening? So let's not, and the pill is amazing at giving us choice about babies. I'm not anti-contraceptives. I'm against the lack of informed consent to take it because they're not honest. So if she's on it and she doesn't want to come off of it and she's there, I would be looking to balance that with knowing what the negatives are to her body. So it causes nutrient deficiencies. Okay, let me make sure that I'm pumping her full of nutrition, whether that's through supplementation or diet, which I know is very hard to do with teen girls. I've got my own. Metabolism gets affected, so we want to really be supporting that blood sugar regulation, making sure the thyroid's all right, and gut microbiome, that it changes. So we want to make sure we're getting a really good probiotic in there to support her. Now, the reason we don't add in body identical progesterone is because with the pill, the synthetic progestin attaches to the receptor really strongly, and the progesterone just can't get on. So it's just a waste of your money. With something like the Mirena coil, it's not as strong, so you can have body identical with it because it can get on there a bit, but it's just not worth it. With
that's really interesting, because of course I'm mostly talking about perimenopause, and a lot of women are asking, but what can I do? And can I add this? Can I add that? So with the Mirena coil, you could add with the real progesterone and also some estrogen.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely have estrogen with the Mirena coil and body identical progesterone. So quite often, some women are like, but I need it for contraceptive, right?
Yeah.
They don't get on with the copper coil because it's too inflammatory and painful. So they have the Mirena. So they'll have that, and they can have both. They can have the Mirena, estrogen, and progesterone.
Okay, but you can't do that when you are on the contraceptive pill. No.
Too strong. It just does. It's no point. Yeah.
No. Okay. Well, that's an important question answered. Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's so nice to talk to you. I feel like I could talk to you all day, Suzanne.
Yeah. Well, and let's keep in touch. And when I have more results, I will show them to you.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, because it is a methylation problem.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And that was something from my little study that I was like, we need to look at this.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the next step that you've gone into, which is amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. It's lovely to meet you, Suzanne.
Yeah. And thank you very much.
No, pleasure. I'll speak to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
In Nederland is het verschil tussen progesteron en progesterogeen een heet hangijzer. Veel artsen denken dat er geen verschil tussen zit. Ja hoor, neem jij maar rustig de pil, maakt allemaal niet uit, zeggen ze tegen meisjes en vrouwen. Maar het progesteron in de pil zorgt ervoor dat je geen ijsprong hebt. En progesteron wordt voornamelijk na de ijsprong gemaakt. Je maakt ook nog wat aan in je bijnieren, maar als je stress hebt, wordt dat omgezet in cortisol. Progesteron is ontzettend belangrijk om oestrogeen in toom te houden. Het kalmeert het zenuwstelsel, bevordert diepe slaap en kan helpen bij stemming en prikkelbaarheid. Daarnaast werkt het beschermend voor je borsten, omdat het overmatige groei van borstklierweefsel remt. Het helpt bij botopbouw en het heeft neuroprotectieve eigenschappen. Dus waarom vanuit de Menopauze Society wordt gezegd, nee hoor, je hebt progesteron alleen nodig als je nog een baarmoeder hebt, om te zorgen dat de baarmoederslijmvlies niet te dik wordt, is mij een groot raadsel. Nog raadselachtiger is dat ze dan ook nog een synthetisch progesteron aanraden, omdat die speciaal gemaakt is om het baarmoederslijmvlies dun te houden, maar dus ondertussen wel de progesteronreceptor bezet, waardoor je alle andere functies mist. Nou, ik vond een geweldig webinar online met biochemicus Phyllis Bronson en apotheker Carol Peterson. En zij zijn de experts op het gebied van progesteron en progesteron.
So I'm Dr. Phyllis Bronson. I'm a PhD biochemist, and I've been working in the original molecular world of hormones for many years. I, in fact, was on, it wasn't so much a committee, it was with my great scientific mentor, Dwight Smith, at the University of Denver. We were the original scientists doing the work on the distinctions between real progesterone and synthetic progestins. So I'm going to talk to you about that a little more as we go on and show you the incredible differences that we were able to articulate some years ago. And that's been the seminal basis for everything I've done since. And then I have an unusual lens because I see things through the biochemistry and then have had a clinical practice with wonderful physicians here in Colorado for many years on the mood biochemistry and what these molecules mean. So I've had a long and winding journey in science and then wrote the book. Can you see this?
Yes, yes.
I can't say it's been without its challenges to do this kind of science, but I spent a lot of time in Denver over the years at the University of Denver, and I had the most incredible mentoring there. So without further ado, I want to jump into some key points, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I want to emphasize today is that good science is based on a couple of criteria. Is it measurable? And that can be qualitative as well as quantitative. But we're looking at measurement and we're looking at replicatability. So can you measure what you're talking about and can you replicate the evidence? And over 30 years, we have been able to see the evidence base for why bioidentical progesterone matters, and form is personal preference. And what's terribly important right from the get-go is to emphasize my view, and Carol's as well, that anything that takes away from the importance of using bioidentical progesterone in sufficient quantities to make a difference is dangerous. And therefore, when you hear me explain these things, it will start to make sense. And, I want to break through some of the influencer stuff I'm hearing that's getting to me and getting under my skin somewhat. Because again, I think that anything that takes away from the importance of daily use of progesterone when women need it. For cycling women, younger women who are cycling, it may only be necessary for half the month, although women with anxiety often need to start a week earlier. And for women who desperately need progesterone, they need it every day. And it makes zero biological or biochemical sense to try to go back into what Suzanne Summers was trying to say. And I give her credit for talking about bioidentical hormones, and she had a great presence, if you will, but she was wrong about the cycling idea. She was just wrong biochemically. It makes no sense to tell older women to start having a fake period again. Why? because then they're not using progesterone every day, which many and most desperately need. They're in menopause, they've been dealing with mood issues for years. Progesterone is the great mood balancer. So that's, for me, myth number one. And I know there are influencer doctors out there trying to bring back Suzanne Summers' Ghost and similar theoretical things by people who have no actual biochemical or medical background. This is not okay. And you're trying to essentially tell women that if they have a fake period, they're going to be young and healthy. Well, it doesn't turn out that way. Anybody can get sick. Things happen. But at least get the facts straight. You're entitled to your own opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts. So that's myth number one. Cycling hormones for older women it makes zero sense. And then the size of the molecule. So lately, NAMS and other associated type doctors, by the way, the very doctors who 25 years and 20 years ago were saying there was no difference between bioidentical and synthetic progestins, bioidentical progesterone and synthetic progestin. Same doctors are now saying, oh, well, transdermal progesterone, the molecule's too big and it can't absorb that well, or whatever they're saying. Okay, so there are the three estrogens, okay? And so what you're seeing is essentially an aromatic ring on the left-hand side of my screen, the right hand. Is that right hand up there?
Yeah.
And so that's the ones with the lines in the structure of the aromatic structure.
Yeah.
And that is very interesting because particularly in estrone E1, there's a carbonyl in the upper right, that double bonded oxygen. And what happens there is many possibilities for mischief in estrone. That's why I'm not fond of that molecule. I think what happens with estrone is because of this double bonded oxygen, that molecule can get bigger and more toxic because there are opportunities for metabolites of estrogens to get held in the body for days instead of hours. And it's because of the structure here on the opposite of the aromatic side, the side without the lines is the aliphatic side. This is very important because when you talk about the size of the molecule, there are things with the estrogens that allow different molecular formations. And then if you show progesterone, same size molecule, girls.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, it's too big, well, look at what the drug companies have been doing for years. They've been making all kinds of topical estrogen products that penetrate the skin. Now, they got, I believe, nervous when topical progesterone was getting very popular, and they came out with their own version of oral bioidentical progesterone, and certain doctors started saying, well, transdermal doesn't absorb it. A, you see the molecular evidence for why it should and does, and B, over 30 years, we've had so many women give up benzodiazepines, get calm for the first time in their lives. And again, form is personal preference, but we have seen this with transdermal over and over again. We also use compounded suppositories. Now, we have colleagues who use oral at night, like Geraldine Pryor is a leading progesterone researcher in British Columbia. She uses the same dose, 300 milligrams at night for women across the board. We do that and more at night. We do it transdermally and with suppositories. And then during the day, when women are anxious and irritable, or one or the other or both, they just use more transdermal. It's the beauty of it. And they can play with it themselves. It is beautifully absorbed. Progesterone is lipophilic. It's taken up into the fat layer, and then it goes into the red blood cells. So the argument that it's not absorbed, A, it doesn't make sense biochemically, and biologically, women are thriving on it and have been for years. if you're getting dosed properly. That's the feedback that we get. And then if women don't get enough, they get stuck in a dead zone. Carol's going to elaborate on that, and we'll come back to it. But the argument that a certain relative newcomer to the field was making a few years ago, Carol and I refuted his paper. I don't really want to get into names here, except when I have to. He articulated this premise that, yes, transdermal is the best form of progesterone. We totally agreed with him, but not after that point, because then he said women only needed 100 milligrams. Otherwise, they would form these metabolites that could be pre-cancer. And some of the best doctors in the field just said that was debunked years ago. The reality is progesterone is, by its very molecular nature, anti-proliferative. Estrogen is proliferative. And so it's not like somebody was saying, is it a gas pedal thing, a brake and a gas pedal at the same time? No, that's absurd. They work synergistically, they work in a dance together. And the reason you need enough progesterone is so that the endometrial lining doesn't get overly thick. And we've had women do their own gynecology for these almost 30 years. We've only had 2 women who had a thick endometrium. Only 1 had considerable bleeding. That's a lot of years of women being responsible for their own gynecology and reporting to us. And then if the endometrium is too thin, that can cause breakthrough bleeding because it can shed. It's not stable enough. But most of the time it gets thick because of low progesterone. And when you get enough progesterone to get a real shed, then you can start over, then it's clean. And it should be checked. I mean, it should be checked gynecologically, periodically. That's what we think. And if a woman has a problem, there should be transvaginal ultrasounds, et cetera. But most of the time, when those molecules are in balance, women thrive. I'm going to turn it over to Carol, and we'll.
Phyllis, can I ask you before we move on, with transdermal, one of the things I hear is, I hear a lot of providers out there saying it does not absorb through the skin. It cannot protect the endometrial lining. Is it more about, and maybe we get into it later, is it more about dose? I've also heard that it needs the right base. Is there a specific base that it needs to get through the skin, or is that not really true? Does the base matter that much?
I mean, I think a good compounding pharmacy makes.
Yeah, I can answer that question.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll give it to Carol in a moment, but
yeah,
the most important point is that most of those doctors talking that way are giving women 100, maybe 200 milligrams. And if they don't get enough, they don't absorb it because, and this is original work I've been involved in, they're not getting any. What matters is what gets the receptor. And in such a high stress world, most of the progesterone is getting shunted to make more crucial biological molecules, notably cortisone, hydrocortisone. And so that's a primary biological molecule. And if you are only getting 200 milligrams, and I'm being generous because most of these doctors are using 100, women don't get any. They never get enough to get the conversion to allopregnenolone, which is how they get calm. And there was some doctor saying, oh, well, transdermal progesterone converts to allopregnenolone and then doesn't go back. And I'm going, that's really good. Really good if it doesn't go back. You want that, because otherwise you need more and more. And in this high-stressed world, both in every imaginable, let's just say in every imagined domain today, and your own personal stress, you're not getting enough progesterone to get calm. It's getting shunted elsewhere. So the root of anxiety is that receptor is hungry. Not tired, it's hungry.
Can you explain that to the women that maybe don't know what the GABA receptor does in our bodies?
So the GABA A receptor GABA is the largest, most abundant neurosteroid and amino acid in the body, and some people are deficient in it, and it is incredibly important for calming, because when it happens, you cannot be anxious if you're getting GABA and progesterone. And there are drugs that try to mimic GABA. I don't understand how the drug works because I don't really see how the mechanism works. But I think a lot of it's placebo, but real GABA is incredibly effective, and especially when it's combined with progesterone. There's one interesting anecdote that in adolescent boys, they found that GABA wasn't as effective as in older, even men, because they had no progesterone at an early age. I thought that was interesting. So I think GABA needs certain cofactors like magnesium if you're using it in younger people. But for women and men, it's incredibly calming to use GABA and progesterone. We use progesterone. My medical partner gives all the men he sees progesterone because it's an aromatase inhibitor. It helps allow the testosterone he's using to not convert back to not convert to estradiol, but also it's calming. And so men can use smaller, they should use smaller amounts than women use, but it's very effective. That with our women, we don't give them a million different supplements. I mean, there are certain things that I think can really be helpful, but if the hormones are balanced, you don't need a million different things. And the containment for the moods that so many of us struggle with. And moods are part of the dance of being a woman. And when you're stressed, whether it's physical illness or emotional major duress, you're going to use up your hormones and you're going to feel it. And you need to trust that and use more. The symptoms are key. Symptoms are key. A good test can only mirror what's going on. Use enough to get calm. It will not hurt you. And form is personal preference. I know there are people who are adamant about oral, but we can't be because we work with mood and our women don't like oral. And it's great for insomnia, and it probably does protect the endometrial lining better than, you know, any other form, because it's consistent if you're using a certain amount every night. But again, when women have used enough, we have seen almost no endometrial problems. Now, am I going to swear that that can't happen? No, of course not, because this is all N of one. Every woman is different. She has to be responsible for her own gynecology. Every woman has to get checked. And if the lining is thick, you need more progesterone. And if there's something really going on, it needs to be checked out. And usually, unless there's continuous bleeding, breakthrough bleeding is usually not serious. But when women who have mood issues use oral progesterone, what happens is there are side chain metabolites, notably 5-alpha-pregnenolone, that form. And that is a first cousin of phenobarbital. And so even in small amounts, women feel weird. It's a good word. They feel weird. And so that's why our women don't like oral progesterone, but they've been trained to use a lot of transdermal. So we just are trying to introduce the biochemistry of why the molecule is not big. It's not big. And the synthetic progestins are big.
Great. Let me look at my list. I'm still hearing from women whose doctors who have a hysterectomy and their doctor says you don't need progesterone. Why is that still being said? I mean, you guys have outlined the millions. I mean, there's so many jobs that progesterone has in the body and so many effects. Where do we know where that ever came from, where progesterone was only needed for the protection of the uterine lining?
Harvard Medical School.
Is it? Okay.
Still saying it.
Are they?
And ACOG and NAMS.
Yeah.
The Endocrine Society. And it makes me wonder seriously about if they ever had a physiology course to accept this kind of garbage.
Yeah.
Katarina Dalton said women with hysterectomy need more progesterone than somebody going naturally into menopause. And I would submit that probably almost every hysterectomy being performed is due in part to if not entirely, to low progesterone. So you have a very low progesterone history, the whole works leading up to hysterectomy. Now, in our infinite wisdom, doctors will give those ladies estrogens after the surgery. They say, oh, you need to take estrogen. You have to take estrogen to help your bones. And in reality, progesterone would have been doing that better. And there's a pathway where estrogen can act, estrogen alone can be a negative for the bones. And that is if your prolactin rises, if there's no tumor there, and prolactin has risen, it's a high estrogen, low thyroid state that is correctable, by the way, with progesterone. And if prolactin rises, it in turn stimulates parathyroid hormone to leach calcium out of your bones. So we are doing a huge disservice to these women right along. We cut them up and continue to do disservice.
You and I talked about, you mentioned when we did a talk for my community, when you were talking about how women are so stressed, and we are obviously we're really using that progesterone, right, to make cortisol. And sometimes you had mentioned that when you have women who sort of out of nowhere have a bleed, right, they're bleeding on hormones, and they've been through this really stressful period of time, like you'll often tell your women, increase your progesterone because they're going to need more progesterone because they're stressing. Correct?
You said it perfectly.
Yeah.
And women who are vulnerable to flat depression may need more estrogen. I mean, we have women who have been literally depression-free compared to where they were for years using AM and PM estradiol and progesterone. And then they have certain times when they feel that old melancholy or whatever, and it can be often circumstantial, but it can be exacerbated by biochemistry.
Yeah.
We tell them use a little more estradiol if that old flatness is back. And also with headaches, there are premenstrual headaches that are related to a drop in estrogen. It's similar to barometric drop. And women should pay attention to that, because if you get headaches when you're getting your period or just when you're under a lot of stress, it can be a need for more estrogen, and your mood will reflect that. Now, I consider progesterone the great mood balancer. So if somebody's just feeling off, a lot of progesterone can really help.
Yeah.
Incrementally during the day and more at night. But
is that more transdermal than during the day? Because oral can make us so sleepy. So you wouldn't recommend oral in the morning, correct?
We use divided doses during the day. Even too much transdermal during the day can make you sleepy. But you can tell, I mean, use 100 and feel good, then keep your hands out of the machinery.
Yeah.
That's the tendency, this culture, oh, I got to do more because I feel good. No, if you feel good, leave it alone.
Okay, I just want to interject one thing. It was a long time before we discovered that anybody got drowsy from progesterone at the 100 milligrams 4 times a day. Or dizzy.
Was it? Really?
Yes. And I want to say that because you can't just jump to the conclusion this is true for everybody.
Yeah.
You can take progesterone orally during the day. Most women can.
Yeah.
There's the exception. But if you're anxious in the morning and you want progesterone and you want to do it in a capsule, that's perfectly fine for most women.
We use transdermal and suppositories when needed at night. I like rectal. I think it works better for a lot of women. They stay in better. So we use a combination of compounded forms. And like I said earlier, we use a lot more at night, because it does make you sleepy. And women, as they get older, they wake up in the middle of the night. Most women do not sleep through the night, but you can use progesterone again. Like 200 milligrams in the middle of the night will often put women back to sleep. We also combine that with the GABA formula that we like if there's anxiety present.
Okay.
And Carol referred to Michael Platt's work. I think a lot of adrenaline dominance is linked to low progesterone. Progesterone and GABA dampen adrenaline. So I like a formula called, should I say?
Ja, ik weet welke zij bedoelt. Dat is de stress maintenance van metabolic maintenance. Ik zal een linkje daarvan in de show notes plaatsen. En dan is het nu eerst even tijd voor reclame. Ja, lieve mensen, zoals altijd hebben we het ook in deze aflevering weer over goed voor jezelf zorgen en je lichaam teruggeven wat het nodig heeft en tekort komt. En daarom vind ik het weer erg leuk dat ik reclame mag maken voor de Solution van Oslo Skin Lab. Niet alleen onze hormonen nemen af met de leeftijd, ook ons collageen. En collageen zorgt ervoor dat je huid elastisch blijft en je dus minder rimpeltjes krijgt. De werking van de Solution is aangetoond door wetenschappelijk onderzoek. Ik zet het er in de show notes bij. Het heeft effect op de huid van je hele lichaam. En na zo'n 8 tot 12 weken zie je al een afname van fijne lijntjes en rimpeltjes. En na een half jaar zelfs verminderde zichtbaarheid van celluliet. Ik ben het zelf ook gaan gebruiken uiteraard. En toeval of niet, laatst plaatste ik mijn eerste video en mensen vroegen: wat doe jij met je gezicht? Ze waren ervan overtuigd dat ik een filter had gebruikt of onder de botox of fillers zat. Nee hoor, kwestie van de juiste supplementen. En wat ik zo makkelijk vind aan deze, is dat het in afgewogen dagdoseringen verpakt is en je het zo mee kunt nemen. De Solution ziet eruit als zo'n suikerstaafje, maar dan met iets wat goed voor je is. Dus ik neem er altijd een paar van mee. Je kunt het met alles mengen, want het is neutraal van geur en smaak, dus ideaal. Als je er een abonnement op neemt, wat ieder moment opzegbaar is, kom je nooit meer zonder te zitten. Want het is net als met hormoonsuppletie. Als je het niet meer neemt, stopt ook het effect en verschrompel je als een appeltje. Ik ben nu bijna 53, over 2 weken, en ik wil dat niet. Wil jij ook zo'n sappige huid blijven behouden? Gebruik dan de kortingscode NIETGEK op www.osloskinlab.nl. De code geeft recht op 60% korting op de eerste verpakking van het vrijblijvende membership van Oslo Skin Lab. En op alle volgende verpakkingen ontvangen members 30% korting. En deze aanbieding is geldig tot het einde van het jaar.
How about progesterone in someone who wants to stay on a Mirena IUD for birth control? Can they use progesterone?
They throw their money away. I think.
Yeah.
Phyllis, do you have any experience with using progesterone with
I mean, it's very hard today to talk to young women about giving up their hormone IUDs because everybody's so afraid to get pregnant in this political climate, frankly. And there's been a preponderance of Mirena use. And the one that causes the most problems, it's the levonorgestrel, progestin in it. When there are toxic GI symptoms that are inexplicable, it's usually a hormone IUD that needs to come out. But nobody usually is open to hearing that early on.
Yeah.
And you know, again, they're using a progestin that is so potent. Think about this, that it's in the body long term. I don't even know how long the change period is currently for that kind of IUD, but it's the one that we've certainly heard a lot of mood issues about and other symptoms. So yes, they can be helpful for endometrial problems, they can control bleeding, but when a woman has inexplicable symptoms, she should get it out. Get it out, get your own biology functional, and see how you feel.
Yeah.
But that
Mirena is getting placed willy-nilly now for heavy menstrual bleeding. And I want to just comment on that briefly, because heavy menstrual bleeding depends entirely on progesterone being there in adequate amount. In the follicular thing, I've seen heavy bleeding and hospital visits and blood transfusions and being told to take 3-4 birth control pill. It's just horrible. It's the biggest reason for hysterectomy in the US today. And now they're just popping in Mirena saying, oh, that's going to help the heavy bleeding. It may or may not. But the simple thing is use progesterone in the follicular phase and not get that layer in the first place. And that's the missing piece. It takes a couple of months and you're done.
That the Danish government did the big study on depression in young women. And it was a very proactive study looking at a large number of young Danish women. And they found the only common thread were birth control pills and IUDs. And it's the very molecules that we were talking about earlier. There's a paper on my web on Phyllis Bronson, PhD.com, biochemical observations on women's moods, where Dwight Smith and I wrote about the correlation to the mood component with the biochemistry. It's really a good paper, a great paper, short, to the point. And I think, you know, it's an important conversation today because parents are so intent with their young teenage daughters on thinking they're being protective by getting them on birth control early. But it's also setting them up for a lifetime of mood issues if they don't learn about real hormones. And then it's hard to get pregnant if you've been on these things for a long time. And so it's not an ethical argument for me, it's a biochemical one. We need good birth control. I don't have any simple answers, but young girls shouldn't be having sex anyway. And they just get their little hearts broken before they know what they're doing. But that's beside the point. But their parents are trying to protect them, and they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong, because these chemicals are really, they're really biochemically altering. And they can really enhance anxiety.
Yeah.
And then it takes years to figure out that was part of it. And so what the original question was, can real progesterone be used with Mirena? What I've told my women is get rid of the Mirena and get going on real hormones. Look up the Mirena crash if you have any questions about how toxic this form of birth control can be. It's effective, but when women have chronic negative symptoms, it could be that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not effective birth control.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's used so widely. I always say follow the money, see who's paying for what at which medical school, you know, which
Nou ja, dat lijkt me sowieso een goed idee als je onzinnige adviezen krijgt. En blijf vooral zelf nadenken en voelen, want ieder lichaam is anders. En sommige vrouwen hebben zoveel last van die hormoonschommelingen dat zij wellicht wel beter een pil kunnen blijven slikken. Zelf had ik geen last van de Mirena. Ik heb er ook gewoon progesteron bij kunnen nemen. Ik had graag geweten dat ik toen ook al oestrogeen bij had moeten smeren. En zo ploeteren we voor, dames. In het land van deskundigen die elkaar tegenspreken en het vaak zelf ook niet weten. Wel, denk ik, als het enigszins kan, gebruik dan alleen bio-identiek. Op mijn Substack zal ik al het wetenschappelijk onderzoek plaatsen wat genoemd is en wat ik zelf nog gevonden heb. Alle tips die gegeven worden. De link sowieso naar het geweldige webinar van Jill Chmielewski met Phyllis Bronson en Carol Peterson, dat nog veel verder gaat en ook nog veel langer duurt. En ik plaats daar ook de video van dit gesprek met Nederlandse ondertiteling. De reden dat ik wat laat ben met het plaatsen vandaag, want dat was een enorme klus. Als je lid wordt van mijn Substack, krijg je ook het boekje De Perimenopauze ontrafeld cadeau, dat ik schreef met huisarts Lotte van Dijk. Het is een gids die richting biedt in dit oerwoud van meningen. Want je ziet, de een zegt dat je wel progesteron kan nemen naast de Mirena, de ander niet. Ik heb het wel gedaan, maar mijn Mirena zat er al 5 jaar, dus die zal niet zoveel meer hebben afgegeven. Je zult het moeten uitproberen, zoals met alles. Dank je wel voor het luisteren en tot de volgende keer.